Well, good morning and welcome everybody. My name is Kristen Bosenberg, joining you from the Telstra Experience Centre in Sydney. Hopefully you're enjoying that jazz music. We've got a great session lined up today with some fantastic speakers to talk about changes in the transport and logistics game. We're going to be looking at what's happening in the industry, having a look at some new innovations. So I'm really looking forward to the session. Now, you would have joined through your browser, and just to let you know when you're on your browser that you do have the opportunity to do different things on the platform. So you do have access to questions and answers. So you can actually ask the panel questions throughout the session, and we will flag questions to ask our panel here, and you can send those through at any time. You've also got some speaker bios, you've got the presentation pack, and you can join us on Twitter under the hashtag Telstra Virtual Events. Now, when you do have your window on your Mac or PC, just remember you can resize the window, the bottom right-hand side. And if you're on your tablet, then you can use your finger to move the window around, and you can also resize by using pinch and zoom. Excellent. So today we're looking at smarter tracking and monitoring solutions for the transport, logistics, manufacturing and retail segment. We've got three different speakers joining us today. The first of those is Charlie MacDonald, and Charlie is the General Manager for Manufacturing, Transport and Logistics at Telstra. In terms of being an industry executive, being across the industry, has a wealth of experience, and he'll be presenting today on what he sees in the industry as being major challenges and what we can do about that. We also have Wayne Chester, and Wayne is joining us from Canada, and Wayne is the President, Chief Executive Officer and Founder of Sendum Corporation, and he'll be offering insights to what he's seeing in the market in North America and globally. We also have Daryl Chambers, the Director of Machine-to-Machine Connectivity based here in Sydney, and together we will be delivering this presentation, taking your questions throughout. So I'm going to throw over to Charlie, and Charlie will be talking firstly about some of the challenges that we're seeing in the market today.
Kristen, good morning, mate, and good morning, everybody. What a pleasure it is to be at this webinar, and hopefully we can be this as interactive as possible, and certainly want to have a good discussion going with my colleagues. Look, what we wanted to do is really set the scene a bit to introduce our thinking about the dynamics in the supply chain. We're picking two or three areas just to start the discussion going. For those on the webinar and my colleagues who know what the Australian Logistics Council are talking about, and the Logistics Council recently published a report talking about some of the challenges in the freight logistics industry. And firstly, their main issue really was this enormous challenge in terms of growth of the freight task. We're seeing this challenge being grown by clearly what the economic dynamics of Australia, and not only is there growth, but there's also this significant component of contribution to GDP, as this slide says, 8.6%. For Australia, of course, there's that growth in logistics is both international and domestic, and the next point on this was some of these challenges around congestion. So we know that we've got big issues around infrastructure capacity. Our seaports are based in major capital cities. They're constrained by rail access and road access. This volume is going to, as we're seeing, this volume is going to double by 2030, and at the same time, we've got existing congestion challenges. So the conversation that I certainly want to get going with people is our response to this just more infrastructure?
Or bigger trucks.
Right, or bigger trucks, or better truck density on the same road real estate, isn't it?
Yeah.
And and maybe technology's got to play in there. Is that similar sort of challenges, Wayne, you're seeing in North America?
Yeah, these are very similar challenges that we're seeing here as well. I can even just talk about a couple of the stories that we get hit with a lot here too. There's one of the most common ones we got in the very, very early days too was somebody would have a box going through the line it would fall off the line and hit the concrete floor, and the box would break open, the contents would spill out. So the workers would come over, they'd pick this stuff up, tape it up, and send it off to the customer. But when the customer got it, he was a jeweler. He was expecting 10 high-end watches, and there would be 7. So the question is, what happened with that? And so the transportation companies were coming to us basically saying, hey, we need you to help us try and figure out how this is happening, where it's happening. And so we started working with them on how to basically track the package and watch it as it went through the system. And we came up with a covert tracking device that they literally put into a package, and we shipped it from Europe to North America because they literally didn't know where this was happening. And it was on the very first night. It was 10:22 p.m. on a Tuesday night at the Los Angeles sorting facility. Somebody opened up the box, and we saw light. So we now instantly knew where this was happening and when it was happening. And by knowing that, we knew who was on shift, and that's actually how we broke up the gang. And that would be a story of one of the things that we see a lot here in North America, some of the high crime rates that affect the industry as well.
Could I just ask you on another point, Wayne, what about the congestion in North America? Are you seeing the same types of issues and challenges around the growth of the industry and, congestion with ports and other infrastructure?
Yeah, we're seeing that. It's manifesting itself actually in a couple of ways. One is congestion itself, and the second is a critical shortage of drivers. They're really struggling to get people to come into the industry and be a part of the industry. And because of that, that's one of the things that we've seen as well, where as they struggle to get some people in, they've got a few drivers that have created some of these theft problems like I was talking about earlier.
I can add to that, and from an Australian view, one of the challenges is an aging workforce, and one of the statistics that's commonly talked about is the average age of an interstate truck driver in Australia is 57. So, attracting talent into the industry. Can I just also talk a bit about the structural change, and maybe it's actually very much linked into employment profile and linked into this growth and congestion. Add those challenges to what is happening in and around retail, and the retailing industry is obviously going through this massive digital disruption caused by what we term as omni-channel shopping, which is the ability to not just shop online, which is obvious really in the new retail world, but also shop online in store, shop at home, delivery to store, shop in the store and wanting it delivered at home or to the office, the click and collect. And this structural change is causing the supply chain to become much, much more agile and much, much more responsive. So it's no longer good enough to pick from DC and deliver to retail outlet. You're picking from DC to person, in fact. Yep. And this is the personalisation of the supply chain is becoming a more and more important factor.
And is that creating more opportunities for things to go wrong in supply chain?
Well, yeah. Daryl, that's a brilliant point because what was straightforward and quite a linear process prior to that is now a network process. So more touch points, more hands, more opportunities.
Okay. I mean, just going back to these challenges that we've got here in this first slide. I mean, you're quoting stats that are going out to 2030, which is fine for somebody like Telstra. But what about the logistics companies out there? I mean, are they looking that far forward? I mean, is this something with they can't really influence infrastructure? I mean, what's their view at the moment in terms of how far forward they're looking?
Well, what a great question. So clearly, I'm not talking about necessarily investment in more ports or more airports or more rail or more roads, because that clearly is long term. It's a federal and state issue. It's a national investment issue, and there's a ferocious debate going on in and around a second airport in Sydney, a second port in Melbourne, the Inland Railroad, but what I would say logistics businesses are doing now today is they're needing to use data much, much more to understand where the congestion is, to be smarter in route optimization. Daryl, are you saying the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing a lot more not just vehicle tracking, but trying to keep an eye on all the assets and where they're going to end up, so that you can have a quicker reaction to something that goes wrong. So we definitely see a change in the way people are monitoring the vehicles moving through the supply chain, but also the goods moving through the supply chain.
I think over time technology is going to assist on better capacity utilisation. We're going to get better train density per kilometre of rail, better truck density. The move to higher productivity vehicles, for example, allows us to get more tonnage per kilometre of road. But that has to be driven by, a safer and more compliant infrastructure.
And I think that's the other side of this, is that while we're seeing an increase in logistics activity, we're also seeing a dramatic increase in compliance and regulations, which is also putting pressure on the logistics channel.
Absolutely. And let's just talk a bit about this complexity and this compliance. I mean, we obviously are going through, as an industry, a really, really difficult period. The last 12 months have seen some really, really disturbing and tragic accidents, which have caused at least 3 major fleets to be grounded for a period of time. So, the customers I'm talking to on a daily basis are all saying that safety and compliance is very much top of mind. And again, this is so important, and it's not easy because we don't have a clear, consistent compliance regime. It is state-based still, certainly from a heavy vehicle perspective. But the importance of speed, fatigue, and mass management is really, really, really a focal point of businesses today. Again, are you seeing that, Daryl, in your industry as well?
Yes, definitely we are seeing that. We're seeing a dramatic increase in the need to monitor more than just how fast the vehicle's going. So there's a lot of other products coming into the market to assist in safety of drivers. Things like the watching your eyelids droop, for instance, that's been put into a lot of vehicles at the moment for truck drivers, so they can tell when a driver's getting sleepy.
That's right. Yeah.
They might have already been dopey, but they're getting sleepy. And then they can then start to put the alerts and alarms in to get the truck driver to stop. We have another project we're running where we're actually trying to get the trucks to stop at certain roadside locations, but some of them are full, and so the truck driver's been forced to drive another 50 or 100 kilometres when he is tired. So we're trying to get an early warning system to the driver to say, stop here because the next one's full. So we're seeing that type of work coming in to try and improve on safety of these vehicles on the roads. The other side of compliance that I would put in is we're talking about the vehicle itself, but we also have goods in vehicles that can be dangerous. So we've had in our lives here, we've all had food scares and people getting salmonella poisoning or whatever it might be in this area. We're going to see a lot more compliance in the way foodstuffs are moved around the country. It's not going to be acceptable to be able to pick it up from a farm and deliver it and say, yes, I've done my job. It's going to be important to monitor the whole way through.
Very good. Just wanted to ask, in terms of that risk compliance as well, are you seeing that drive, Charlie, coming from the operators, or is it also the people employing those operators? So, for example, in my local area, some services were stopped, and the council had to come out and explain those services and why they stopped because the fleet was grounded. Is it also becoming a political play in the sense that people who are providing these services through a third party, which may be transport, logistics, or other company, do you think they're driving it, or is it something that the industry's also trying to improve?
I think that's a great question. The industry is extremely conscious of the need for increased compliance, and we're seeing major leaders in the industry in all sectors being extremely public about their compliance and safety. The complexity and challenge they have is that they have an ecosystem of subcontractors. So I think this is driven not only by transport operators, but also, as the chain of responsibility covers both the consignee and consignor, the shipper and the receiver. So it's everyone in the supply chain. And clearly there is a heavy pressure from state and federal governments to improve safety and compliance. That's for sure. But I mean, a lot of our leaders in our industry, I would say they've got it, they understand it, and it's really part of the DNA of the industry. The difficulty is this large ecosystem of subcontractors.
Phil. I mean, trying to get uniformity across that, and which speaks to interoperability. And we do have a lot of subbies out there. We do have a lot of different companies, and they've all got their own standards. I talked to one group last week, developing their own standards, if you like, their own process, because that maps their business, but it may not necessarily fit in with everybody else's business. In terms of working with other logistics companies and through the vertical.
Well, I'd be interested to hear Wayne's view of this. I mean, certainly ours in Australia is and maybe some of the people on the call are involved in some of the projects that we're trying to introduce better exchange of information and better standards. Traditionally, a lot of supply chain operators had managed closed systems because that was their business model. I think our challenge is, and this is typical across industry, as we move to a more open and shared platform, a more collaborative supply chain, how do we exchange information in a timely manner, and which is not necessarily the damaging a particular company's intellectual property.
Wayne, can I get your point of view from North America? Are you seeing any driving force at the moment for common standards and interoperability?
Yeah, we are absolutely seeing here a big push in compliance, and it's compliance with government regulations that the shipper has to comply with, or the carrier themselves. And one of the stories I always tell about this in the very early days, I got a phone call from a guy. He said, Wayne, I need your tracking device. I said, what do you do? Because remember, we started out as a security kind of play. And he said, well, I sell frozen fish. And I said, are people stealing your fish? He said, no. He said, Wayne, what happened to me last week was, and this was a couple years ago, he said he had a load going to his customer. He said, Wayne, it should have taken 3 days for that load of frozen fish to get to my customer. It took 6. And he goes, I am absolutely convinced that truck broke down, that driver got the refrigeration unit fixed. He has refrozen the meat and delivered it. And he goes, and guess who's liable? Me. I'm the one who's liable. I'm the one who's going to get in trouble. And I understand you have temperature monitoring inside your devices there. I said, we do. He goes, that's why I need it. I said, great. And so that's really how we got involved in it. And, that was the odd guy calling us on that kind of an issue 8 years ago. And today we're just getting literally nonstop calls from people every single day about how to comply with government regulations, around the world that everybody has. And not only just how do I comply, but how do I collect that data and how do I have it in a format that's going to meet the needs of the government.
Just a further point to that, Wayne, I'm just thinking because if I look at the broader IT industry at the moment, look at countries like, and I'm talking about security and I'm talking about changes in process. So in the logistics game at the moment, if there's a break in the process, if, for example, that delivery gets delayed, if that causes a potential health issue with fish being delivered, as an example, I'm not aware that, there's no compulsory notifications that are going out to groups of people, but I see in the IT industry that security breaches, it's being talked about at the moment. Germany's already flagged it, that it will almost become compulsory for business to say, we've had a breach, or we've had a change in our process, or we can see something that we don't understand, because they want to increase their standards. Charlie, do you see in the industry, because if we talk about these breaches, do you see, is there any regulation coming through, or do you see, what's the appetite for people to have to respond to, changes in the supply chain?
Well, we can talk a bit about, that we have lots of codes of practice in the industry, and the codes of practice are very much part of the way that the governance of the quality of the supply chain. We have in our retail sector 2 fairly dominant players in Australia, and I don't need to tell you who they are, and they're obviously going to be very, very insistent on maintenance of quality. I think Wayne's point is all around transparency and integrity, and at the moment we have codes of conduct that may talk about the need to have certain tolerances on temperature or certain tolerances on other environmental factors. What is, we might be doing spot audits as a way of maintaining that. at what stage do we want to? Supply chains and services never stand still, do they? They're always on this improvement process. So what is that next step in terms of control and transparency of information and availability of information? And I think that really is going to be driven by the consumer. And that, again, of course, might change regulations. But I think for the most part, I'm not necessarily an expert on the fish delivery process. For most part, my understanding is it's codes of practice generated by the industry.
Very good. We're going to go to our first question. So everybody online, this is your chance to partake in the little survey. We have a couple of these questions throughout the session. And the first question is, what major challenges are facing your business today? We're looking at compliance complexity. Is it customer demand and looking at the changes with omni-channel disruption, supply chain interoperability, and also understanding the changing world of technology and how to best utilise it. So if you could respond to that, and we'll get to that result very shortly.
Can I just add to that question, guys? One of the things we didn't want to ask you is if cost management was one of your major priorities. We're assuming in this industry everyone is running off a smell of an oily rag, so that's a given. So it's getting the right cost position, we believe, is an absolute given here, and you guys, I know, spend a lot of your time trying to get your cost structure right, asset utilisation right. We're interested in your feedback.
Here we go. So, digesting that. So it seems that half of the audience that you're will probably join the call with Telstra anyway, because it's about utilising technology and understanding it. I find it hard enough with all the different hats that we wear in our different roles to be across technology, and it's my full-time job. So we'll be talking to that later on. And then it seems a relatively even split, but a bit of a lean then towards customer demand and changing customer demand.
Yeah.
And you were talking to that, Charlie, which is picking from DC and then delivering straight out to the person.
Yeah.
So that changing retail environment.
And that digitalisation of the digital disruption of both manufacturing and retail has this massive implication on the supply chains, and the need to become more and more personalised. We as shoppers, we as consumers are demanding it ourselves in our own life, and therefore, how do we become more agile?
Well, I'd say, one of the interesting things there is, if technology is the challenge, the other side of that is to make it easier to use, because you have this potential to make the technology the focus. And the reality here is that we just said this average age of a driver is 57 or something. Yeah. There's no way we can make the technology more complex. We need to make the technology much easier to use and much easier to get the data out of that's meaningful. And that's the real challenge. And I think that's what that slide says as well, is what do I do with all this stuff? It's all coming at me now at a rate of knots. How do I make it useful?
Maximum 2 buttons.
That's the one. So Wayne, I was hoping you could talk to this quote from FedEx.
Yeah, so what we have here is obviously a quote, a very famous quote from Fred Smith in 1978 there, 36 years ago, which is hard to imagine, where he basically went out and said to everybody that the information about the package is just as important as the package itself. And it's them and a lot of the leading companies have just been on this never-ending quest to get more and more information. And, when we talk to the folks at FedEx, they tell the story about how when they first started to be able to tell you the 5 major waypoints of a package, it was revolutionary in its day as the first few companies implemented that. The day that they picked up the package at my office, what time it got to the Vancouver airport, what time it got to Memphis, what time it got to Sydney, and what time it got to your office. That was revolutionary in its day. And now we're approaching a point where they're able to tell the customer where the package is at every single point along the way, not just the 5 major waypoints, but everywhere along the route. And not only are they telling you the information about where it's at, but much, much more important, the vital signs of the cargo. And those are the kinds of things that are driving it. And when I meet with these folks and other leading companies, they believe very, very strongly that competitive advantage lies in this information. And that's what's driving them to move along these kinds of lines.
Yes, it's, Wayne, as you probably know me, I worked for the opposition for many years, so I always enjoy that Fred Smith quote, and I think it was back in the late 70s, absolutely revolutionary. And where are we now in 2014? And the other often quoted sort of cry in the industry is, information absolutely equals inventory. And the better the quality of information, and not just quality in terms of accuracy, but timeliness as well, can change inventory holdings. And certainly when we're able to talk about whether it's just in time or vendor managed inventory or leaner supply chains, that is absolutely going to be driven by better quality, faster information. In my time with the opposition of Federal Express, we used to have a saying that we had to have information available to our customer about the location of the package within 15 minutes of recognising where it was. And why we said 15? It's because Fred Smith said 30. So that was yeah.
Well, I mean, do you see the value of real-time information really being about personalisation of the service? Because what we're really talking about is the change in time, right? Which is the time to the customer and getting to real-time information. Is that where you see the major driving force towards consumer trends?
Daryl, I think real-time information of certain events is important, but knowing at every given moment where something isn't necessarily the important issue. But the product from Wayne are telling you that something's happening along that chain that you never used to have visibility of. That's important. So it might be a temperature change, or it might be that someone's tampering, or someone's dropped your TVs in a container. That sort of thing becomes very important information. But most times you don't need to know because nothing happens, and you don't want to have that information being pounded at you. I know most people would ship stuff, they'll look up FedEx, but they'll only look up as an out of interest, where is my good? They're not caring that it's between Memphis and LA or something like that. They just want to know it's on its way. But if it's a critical asset and something's happened to it on the way, they'd like to know that instantaneously.
Okay. I think that's a really good point, and I think it's different stages, and different supply chains will have different instrumentation and tolerances. If we're shipping a sea container across the Pacific, knowing where it is every 10 minutes is not necessarily needed. But knowing the condition of it continuously might be important. Mm-hmm. So it's making sure that you've got the right solution for the right supply chains. But there's a lot of conversation going on in the blog sphere about Uber, and Uber playing into last mile delivery. And if we think of the Uber model in last mile delivery, it's very much about real time. Where am I? Where's my service? And how can I relate those two things? So I think that moves on to how we're seeing tracking technologies evolve. And if you don't mind, I'll start this conversation about, because obviously I've been around since Adam was a lad doing this. So we saw supply chain visibility come in, and it was the integrators in the industry that introduced that in the early to mid 80s, and we've seen that evolve from paper-based systems to barcode-based systems, or to machine readable, through to this massive sort of evolution of technologies. And really now, I think, under the sensors, where we've got, in the 80s, if you like, we've had this sort of disconnected world. And where we are now, we have our connected world. And what does the connected world mean? I would like to just sort of, if you just, think about what the Internet of Things means to the supply chain. And the Internet of Things, to me, is we're now connecting stuff that wasn't connected before. Once we connect it, we can now monitor. Once we monitor, we can now manage. Now we can measure and manage. So that monitor, measure, manage sequence is really what we're going, if you see, from left to right, from really trust-based, it's okay, mate, you'll be all right, based systems on the left, to much more dynamic and agile systems, because we're now monitoring, measuring and managing. I'd open up to the rest of the panel for commentary on that. I mean, you've seen the same things. What's your view on that evolution?
Well, from our point in the machine-to-machine communications area, we have seen obviously the cellular networks have taken over as the predominant way of transmitting data in the logistics chain. 20 years ago, we had a number of proprietary networks trying to compete. They've disappeared. We are into a cellular business, some satellite for the very remote. So today, not only is it the cellular network that's taken over, but the cost of running on these networks has come down dramatically. So there's a lot of the building blocks that allow you to build a better transport logistics management system have been put in place. I think coupled though to the growth in the coverage of cellular and the drop in the price of using these networks, we're starting to see that it's no longer, I've said it once before, it's no longer about where is my vehicle, because that of itself is not the interesting thing. It is where is my asset in the vehicle, or is the vehicle going to come to my depot or my house at the time committed. That's the important thing, not just where is everything. Because if you try where is everything, you just get lots of red dots on maps, and that's not interesting.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was talking to a people moving business. I was talking to a bus company recently, and the bus company had up to 3 different GPS units in the bus.
Yeah.
And they have that for different reasons, because they've got to go back with compliance standards to whoever's employed that service. But you see, I mean, they did that because they had to. But do you see any consolidation of that over time? I mean, because they've got different parties wanting different levels of information. But I just see that at the moment you see some businesses, and it's almost like an overlay of technology, a redundancy of technology, because they can't talk to each other, or at least utilise some of that data.
So Chris, my view is the right technology for the right application. So we're seeing, we've tried, many people on this call, I'm sure, have tried in their careers RFID technology. And, and back 14, 15 years, everything was going to be RFID tagged. And we couldn't work out the right business case. It was almost a technology looking for a solution. We're seeing in the apparel supply chain, driven by the omni-channel shopper's desire to have a much more flexible set of services and the need to increase in-store inventory accuracy, RFID coming back into the apparel industry, and we're seeing leaders in the United States, and maybe that's a good...
It's a lot cheaper now too.
Yeah, it's a lot cheaper, it's at the right price, but if you can improve your in-store inventory accuracy by X%, the return on sales seems to be directly related to that. So we're seeing a re-emergence of these types of technologies. But I would, whether the sensors are active RFID, passive RFID, and we're seeing, the sort of Bluetooth and beacons coming back in as well. Not coming back in. Interest being shown in the supply chain for extra measurement and monitoring.
Okay, what we're going to do is move through to our next question, because we still have some content to get through before we get to midday. So the next question for everybody on the call is, are you using tracking solutions in your business today? And if so, what type of tracking solution are you using? Using GPS, data loggers, Wi-Fi, RFID, or manual? Be interesting to see what we get for response there. I mean, I found it interesting with this company that I was talking to about the buses, that they've got different GPS systems, but what I see at the moment is there's still a lot of overlay of technology that do have some redundancies, I believe, but that's more, I think, the industry having to come to terms with interoperability and the willingness to share at least some forms of that data. Okay, so we'll go through the results and see what the results are for that. GPS. So most of you are tracking with GPS there, very few with Wi-Fi. Very good. Okay, so what we're going to be doing now is moving on to a product that Telstra introduced to the Australian market with our partners only about a month ago. And this is the Sendum solution, which is really neat, because when you want to find it, you just go to find them. And I always found that it's nice to have products that have a great name. But what I wanted was Daryl to take us through the product and what Charlie was saying before. It's about finding the right solution for the right segment and for the right supply chain. And Daryl will take us through this particular product.
Great. So the Sendum product that we have up on screen here, it's called a PT300D. It's a 3G battery-powered tracker. It's exclusive to Telstra. There's been a few questions up I see recently about we need international solutions. This product actually has been designed to work across the American and Australian/European markets, and it will work across CDMA and 3G technology. So it's a true global package tracker product. It's very small, battery-powered. There is a line-powered option. I saw a question come up before about line power, so there is a line-powered option for it as well that's coming out. One of the beauties of this product is it doesn't just rely on GPS for its tracking information. So unlike a lot of other tracking products that have to see the sky, have to see a GPS satellite, this product looks for the GPS satellite but also looks at the cell tower locations from the Telstra network and also looks at the Wi-Fi mapping addresses that the Wi-Fi mapping companies are recording all around the cities in the country. So it's taking 3 sources of data to try and get a position fix. It won't always be hugely accurate, but it will give you a fix to say we know we're in this position, roughly in this position, and that's important to a lot of the applications out there. It's not just a battery-powered tracker though. The beauty of this product is that it actually is a battery-powered sensor that then sends its information with location information. So as a sensor, it runs a number of different sensors built into the product itself. So it can measure temperature, it can measure humidity, it can measure light, tilt, pressure. It's having a drop sensor put into it at the moment or activated at the moment. So all these things can be programmed up on the unit and then set so that when you put this in with a package, it can actually send out an alert if something moves outside of the norm. Sendum Wireless is the supplier, so we've got Wayne on the line from North America. They're a global leader in this business. They're one of the major providers of the package tracker type products in the world. And it's we think it's a very useful product for this sort of high value, critical asset, dangerous goods, foodstuffs type tracking. The product itself is one thing, but it also comes with a very detailed application layer, a portal that you can log into to look at your assets, and it gives you a high level view of the assets, so you can actually see all the different assets you have, where they are. It will lift up the products that have got exception reporting up to the top of that page. It will allow you to drill down then into what that particular asset looks like, what's happening to that asset. It might be a temperature's gone mad. It might be that a package has been opened when it shouldn't have been, but you can then drill down and see where that happened.
Just to give everybody on the call a better view of what that screen is showing you. So we do have some demonstration units here in the Telstra Experience Centre, and on the previous screen you would have, we're just going to go back to that previous slide, and we have 5 different devices there. It shows you if they're in Sydney or Melbourne. You'll see a little alert there as well, a little yellow triangle. So what it means is not only does the device obviously measure these things such as temperature and humidity and pressure, but what you can actually do is set up alert levels. So if the device gets tilted by a certain angle, which may be 90 degrees or 180 degrees, it means that will go in an alert state, and that can then be set up to send you a notification to tell you what is happening with that device associated with a particular shipment. On the next slide, we actually drill down into the individual unit, and it shows a location on the map, but it also shows you all the metrics for that device. And then you can go through and obviously set up the alerts.
So that's the Sendum Find Them portal. It's also an opportunity. There's also an option for customers with their own tracking systems to integrate these into their tracking systems using the API. Okay. So we have a mix of companies doing both those things.
So it's an open API that
there's an API under an NDA, but there's an API they can use. It's very simple. We work with a number of companies already to integrate.
Right.
So the data, instead of coming to a portal in the cloud, is coming to that company's own location.
Excellent. Good news. And I wanted to ask yourself then, Wayne, obviously you know a lot about this product, being the founder and the CEO, but maybe you can add some thoughts to the product and how it's being used across the globe at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. So basically I'll just give you a couple more examples on top of the 2 that I gave, but really a lot of it really boils down to 2 broad categories. One, if I lose it, either because it's been accidentally lost or stolen, or the second category has it's been mishandled. And I'm telling the story recently. In the last year, we started working a lot with life sciences companies. They're basically going out there and they're trying to build custom drugs for people, and they have to go through an FDA process in order to get approved. And the guy was saying to me, Wayne, at 75% and above, we pass the FDA. Below 75%, we fail. And he goes, and we estimate that between 20 and 22% of all our samples go bad in transit. And I said to him, well, how's that happening? And he said, well, basically we were shipping these tissue samples at minus 80 degrees C, and we put liquid nitrogen in there in order to keep them at that very, very cold state. Because it's a gas, the container actually has some vents at the top, and we got it marked very clearly this side up. And as long as that container is this side up, that will keep those things good for 21 days, and if they lay it on its side, it's good for 2 days. And I said, well, what are these samples worth? He said, Wayne, they're worth about $30,000 a piece. And I said, well, that's not a super, super high dollar value, but if you're losing 20%, that's big bucks. He said, Wayne, I could care less about losing the samples. He said, the real truth is he goes, I'm worried about the $1.75 billion we spent on R&D. He goes, can you imagine spending that kind of money on a drug and having it fail the process because the samples went bad in transit? And I said, well, how exactly are we going to help you with that? He said, well, if I can go to the FDA and show them this sample was going through the system, that it was laid on its side at this time, and the temperature rose, I can say to the FDA, this was a bad sample, and you need to pull it out of the data set and not hold it against me. And they've actually got agreement from the FDA to do that. And so that would be a classic example of a way that a customer is using us and trying to meet a compliance issue.
Wayne, can I just ask you a question? We've got some customers asking about the temperature range of the product. What type of temperature range, as an example of one of the sensors, can you talk to maybe the range of ability for these sensors to capture information and also the battery life?
Sure. On the temperature range itself, we say that it's good from sort of minus 20 to about plus 65. But as you can imagine, the example I gave you where the guy's shipping it something at minus 80, and we have customers who are shipping stuff at a cryogenic state at minus 181 degrees. So what we have is a temperature probe that are specifically designed for those kinds of problems. They put that down inside the sample. There's a thermal barrier between the sample and the Sendum device where you plug the temperature probe inside there. Humidity ranges, we can go from 0 to 100. All the different sensors like the altimeter and all that kind of stuff, they've all got standard ranges. But that would be an example with the temperature.
Can I also ask about the battery life? So, I mean, just to help people on the call, so the device actually has a battery that you can snap out of the device and snap back in, so you can have batteries to replace it. You also get alerts when the battery reaches a point that it needs to be recharged. The device needs to be recharged or swapped out. But Wayne, what are you seeing for battery life on the devices?
Yeah, so that's one of the hardest ones for me to always answer truthfully. What we say to most folks in the logistics chain is that it's going to be good for around 21 days. That always seems to be a magic number for us and on sort of a coast-to-coast kind of shipment. And that's based upon the following. One, I'm taking the temperature and the humidity and everything like that sort of every 5 minutes, and then every hour I'm transmitting the location data along with the information that we've collected. And then on the 21st day, I believe it's been lost or stolen. And so for the average folks, at least, in North America and Europe and things like that, that's what they're seeing. Now, we do have instances, though, folks who want to go much longer or they have a much higher reporting rate, and then we have different batteries that can plug into the unit to extend the range or increase the life of it.
Wayne, can I just, I'm just thinking we've only got 15 minutes to go. We're getting lots of questions from everybody on the call, which is fantastic. Can you take us through a couple of examples, just on our next slide, in terms of people who are using the product and talk to that? Actually, the poll question? We can go to the poll question as well while we're doing that. So one of the poll questions, everybody, is what are the key issues facing your business in implementing asset tracking? Is that getting it to work across the supply chain? Is that to meet the requirements for chain of control? Is it getting the business case right, which we've talked about previously in terms of getting that business case correct? Is it to reduce cost loss and looking at theft across the supply chain? Or is it being used for driving business efficiencies? So if you could respond to that question, and what I'll do is I will get Wayne to talk to the customer examples. If we can skip to... here we go. We've got the results. The results are very quick. There we go. Loss, theft. So 33% of you, a third of you, have said that that's one of the major drivers, as well as driving business efficiencies. There we go. Excellent. So moving through, Wayne, so could you take us through some of the examples that you're seeing in the market and why people are using this type of product and why it works?
Yeah, so there's really an incredibly wide variety of reasons why folks do use this. Again, I always lump them into two broad categories. Just I'm losing it for whatever reason because my guys misplaced it or it's been stolen or because it's been mishandled. In the early days, Sendum was all about the theft and things like that. But as time has marched on, we've gotten much more into the mishandling. And, we've got folks shipping lettuce, cucumbers, tomatoes, all those different kinds of things who are reaching out to us to figure out how they can keep track of these goods and, more importantly, make sure that they're being handled safely, right? Another strange example that I give from time to time was in the early days on the sort of logistical side, the U.S. Postal Service reached out to Sendum and they said, we got this problem where it should take 5 days for a letter to go coast to coast in the United States. And 99 times out of 100, it takes 5 days. And then one time out of 100, it appears to us that it's taking 2 to 3 weeks, and we don't know why. And so they actually bought a fairly large number of Sendum tracking devices, and they just started mailing them, literally from San Francisco to New York, and mailing them back to see if they could figure out. And lo and behold, if they didn't find out that at the major sorting centers there was a bug in the sorting software that, like if I was sending a letter from San Francisco to a friend in New York, when it got to the major sorting center inside of New York City, the computer had a glitch and sent it right back to where it came from. And it took a technology like this that they could literally watch it go through the chain and see what was happening to figure out what the problem was and get it corrected, right? Almost every conceivable industry that you can think of, farm to fork, different kinds of military applications, law enforcement applications. Just doesn't seem to stop. Where banks put us inside bank bags that they're shipping. Clothing, jewelry. I gave a jewelry example earlier. The tobacco. Everybody who's shipping something is suffering these kinds of pain, and that's really what we seem to wind up addressing with them.
Well, I think it's a good example that it's not only for the goods necessary to track the goods, but it's also been used to effectively test the transit lanes that you've got in place. So I really like that example.
I'll just interrupt. We're very early on with the product in Australia with Telstra, but we've had a number of customers that started their trials, and one particular customer shipping medical equipment exactly had this application. They had been paying a super premium service for a direct delivery of their medical equipment to a hospital for surgery, and they were paying well over the odds for that service. They've been running units in trials because they're trying to identify where their goods are going in hospitals, because they do get lost sometimes. But in the middle of that trial, they found that their particular equipment was taking a long 1 or 2 hour detour to a coffee shop. So they were actually having a sort of a 2 or 3 hour supply chain problem when they thought it should have been half an hour. And they actually didn't understand at the time that it took half an hour, not 3 hours, to deliver these goods. So just in a couple of units, they could prove that they could improve their efficiency of getting goods in for an emergency surgery by tracking these assets.
And I think this live transit time testing and transit routing is a really interesting use case. Again, this is sort of new measurement that wasn't available beforehand. Maybe, Wayne, there's a question. Can I ask you a question about where you would say this isn't applicable? I mean, we've talked about, you talked about, it's good for a load of industries. Where would you see the challenge are? Where would you see Sendum sort of, the challenge not necessarily being resolved with this type of solution?
We see it in several places. One, which is probably one of the more obvious, is when we're trying to track an asset that really has little or no value. That's one of the most common ones that we see. The second one is when the organization isn't ready for it. One of the features which has not been talked about here, for example, is on the PT is a GPS jamming detector. And after this call, if you guys ever want to do something crazy, just go out and look on the web. You'll see that the U.S. government has been doing some testing at airports. One of the fears, and this is all public information, is that terrorists may use GPS jammers at an airport. And so the FBI and some of the guys went out to do some studies at airports to see what kind of natural interference was happening, and they found jammers everywhere. And so they brought in a bunch of folks to figure out what was going on. And what it was all the truck drivers who had GPS units inside their cars that their trucks that their bosses had put in there. They were buying these cheap jammers, putting them in the cigarette lighter so that they couldn't be tracked. And, you know, in the early days when we had the GPS jammers, a lot of our customers reported to us a lot of false jamming, and then we found out it was their drivers were actually trying to jam it. Now, that was important to send them for two reasons. One is because if we can see it, we can report it. And number two, we work around it. But how are you supposed to go out there and implementing things like this if you don't have the team really wanting to see the change? And we've seen some objections by unions and people like that. But those are the two most common kind of problems that we've seen. One, again, cost. Two is just organizationally they're not ready to swallow it.
So when it's Charlie again, do you see any particular appetite for purchase here? Do you see it more as a retailer or manufacturer, or do you see it more in the transport and logistics sector, or is it sort of, you know, a blend between the lot?
I'd say first 12 years, it was almost exclusively the shipper, the guys who owned the goods that were shipping them, and their attitude was the trucking companies or the carriers just really didn't care, right? And I think that was true. And then as some of the bigger companies started getting, you know, really aware of what this could do, again, they started seeing this information and realizing that competitive advantage lies there. And now today, I'd say the pull is equal from both sides.
Interesting. Thank you.
Excellent. So we're now going to move on. We've only got less than 10 minutes to go, unfortunately, because I'd love to chat about this for quite a while. But just looking to the future, and I wanted to ask Charlie first. Firstly, in the industry, who do you think is doing a good job? You don't necessarily have to name names, but is there any reason why you think people are doing well in the industry? And what are your thoughts for the future and where it's heading?
I think the first thing I would comment on in the transport and logistics industry, in the sector itself, is this is a service industry. And if anybody ever gets to a position in the service industry that thinks they're doing well, they're probably getting to that position of complacency. So we're never satisfied. We're never satisfied with our DIFOT. We're never satisfied with our customer service. And that, I think, is an extremely healthy thing. So apologies for the bland answer.
No.
But, you know, it's what was acceptable from a track and trace and supply chain visibility today will not be acceptable tomorrow. So we're in this process of continuous improvement. What I think is key now, and we've got obviously a very appropriate slide up, seeing that Google announced this week about the testing of the last mile delivery in Australia, let's forget some of the aspects of technology for a moment. And I think the fundamental change in supply chains is the way that people are collaborating. And this fundamental change of bringing in the consumer into the manufacturing process, the collaboration with the consumer in the retail is causing us to have this incredible need for flexibility and agility. And that can only be driven by information. So if I've got a 30-second finisher, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing in this industry this drive for ever closer collaboration and transparency driven from information.
Yeah, and I'd say there's a drive to increase the granularity of what you're monitoring. So getting down further and further down the chain, from truck to container to what's inside the container. In turn, that creates this big data issue. What do I do with all the data? So the companies that are going to succeed here are going to be the ones that make it easy to implement and easy for the users to take that information and make it useful to them. If it's just data, it's useless. It's got to be useful data.
Wayne, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that everybody's saying. And again, when I get that ability to look right down to that package and understand what's happening, it gives me great insight to a level I never had before. But at the same time, when I have large volumes of these things out there and they start to roll that up, they get into the true world of big data, where I can now see interrelationships and things like that happening that I could never see before, as in that example of the U.S. Postal Service. And of course, big data creates operational efficiency, it improves the customer experience and allows us to create new business models. And every time there's a new and discontinuous innovation, it turns the world upside down and allows people to jump ahead of the former markets.
Just another, thank you, Wayne. If you do have any questions, feel free to send them through. We do have a couple of minutes remaining. And the first question that we've got is about the Sendum device and the product and the service. Daryl, maybe you can talk to that in terms of what's out there in the market and who they'll talk to.
Okay, well, the product, the Sendum PT300D, is an exclusive product with Telstra. So if there's anyone who's interested in that, they should go through their account executive to arrange a demonstration, and we and Telstra can come out and work through the product with them. Typically, the product itself off the shelf isn't ready. We need to configure it to the application that the customer has in mind, and then they will test. But it's open there. There's demo units available for customers to test with, and there's commercial stock available if people want to roll out.
Okay, so they can test that before they.
Absolutely, we have a test program in place for customers, so they can take a couple of units, get used to them, see how they work, put them into the process, change the way they work so they get exactly what they want, and then work out whether it's going to work for them. The other side of that is there's a good business tool to work out whether it is or isn't a profitable, worth monitoring project. So there's a nice, simple spreadsheet that the account exec can go through that says, right, this is how many units we've got, this is the cost of the units, this is the type of loss you're suffering, is there or is there not a business case that's got to pay back in a reasonable period of time?
Sure. Now, we've had a question about the data and where the data's being stored, and also about integration with ERP systems, and we've talked about the API under NDA.
So the data's stored in the cloud. It's on the Find'em portal, which comes with the product. If you choose to not want the data being stored in the cloud, because some people have concerns with data being stored in the general cloud, it's always possible to have this data pointed directly to your own servers. Wayne probably can't talk about it, but they have a number of defence force, police force type customers in the US that have the data sent straight to their own services because they historically haven't been happy to use the cloud.
But there's an application integration toolkit through their APIs.
And we work with a number of companies already here in the trial stage to point that data in direct from the Sendum device straight into their own servers.
Fantastic.
Very good. Well, we're getting towards the end of the session, so I'd like to thank everybody for joining us online. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Charlie, Wayne and Daryl for joining us as well. And I've enjoyed the discussion. And remember, you can join us for further virtual events. We've got another one on October 8th, again with Charlie MacDonald, and that's for, or the presentation is called Make for Asia. And Charlie will be talking to that and about the region and focusing on his insights and what he's seeing across the industry. So thank you once again for joining us at the Telstra Virtual Event Seminar today. My name is Christian Bosenberg, and we hope to see you or hear from you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.